Okay, so today class we're going to be reading a read aloud of the book The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton. Okay, so let's get started. Once upon a time there was a little house way out in the country. She was a pretty little house, and she was strong and well built. The man who built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she will live to see our great-great-grandchildren's great-great-grandchildren living in her." Can everyone see?
Mm-hmm.
The little house was very happy as she sat on the hill and watched the countryside around her. She watched the sunrise in the morning, and she watched the sunset in the evening. Day followed day, each one a little different from the one before, but the little house stayed the same. Do you see any difference between this picture and the last one? No? Okay. In the nights, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, then back again to a thin old moon. And when there was no moon, she watched the stars. Way off in the distance, she could see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about the city and wondered what it would be like to live there. Have you guys ever been to the city, like maybe New York City?
Yeah.
Yeah? What did you think of it? Like, why do you think the house was so curious to see the city when she was in the farm? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Because it's different.
Different? Nice. Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the seasons. In the spring, when the days grew longer and the sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south. She watched the grass turn green, she watched the buds on the trees swell, and the apple trees burst into blossom. She watched the children playing in the brook. So do you guys see the children over here? It's all springtime, it's different from the last picture, and you see more of the landscape. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves, and the white daisies cover the hill. She watched the gardens grow, and she watched the apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children swimming in the pool. Can you guys see the children? Can you point to them? Nice. Nice job. In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights colder, she watched the first frost turn the leaves to bright yellow, and orange and red. She watched the harvest gather and the apples picked. She watched the children going back to school. So just like when you guys go to school, these children were going to school. You can see the leaves changing, all the different colors, because the house is going through the seasons. What season do you think this is before looking at any of the words?
Winter.
Nice! Okay, let's see. In the winter, when the nights were long and the days short, and the countryside covered with snow, she watched the children coasting and skating. Year followed year, the apple trees grew old and new ones were planted. The children grew up and went away to the city. And now at night, the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. One day, the little house was surprised to see a houseless carriage coming down the winding country road. Pretty soon there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. Pretty soon along came some surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the little house. Pretty soon along came a steam shovel and dug a road through the hill covered with daisies. And then some trucks came in and dumped some big stones on the road. Then some trucks with little stones. Then some trucks with tar and sand. And finally, a steamroller came and rolled it all smooth, and the road was done. So do you guys see where this is all happening in here? Where the steamrollers come in? What do you think? Why do you think this is happening? Do you think it's changing around there? What do you think's happening? Do you have any thoughts about it, Alyssa?
No.
No? Okay, well, maybe we'll find out soon. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles go back and forth to the city. Gasoline stations, roadside stands, and small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster than before. More roads were made and the countryside was divided into lots. More houses and bigger houses, apartment houses and tenement houses, schools, stores, and garages spread over the land and crowded around the little house. No one wanted to live in her and take care of her anymore. She couldn't be sold for gold or silver, so she just stayed there and watched. Do you see a difference in this picture based on the first picture of the house? What do you see?
Lots of buildings.
Nice, good observation. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the street lights shone all night. This must be living in the city, thought the little house, and she didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the fields of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. Pretty soon there were trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed to be very busy and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Pretty soon there was an elevated train going back and forth above the little house. The air was filled with dust and smoke, and the noise was so loud that it shook the little house. Now she couldn't even tell when spring came, or summer, or fall, or winter. It all seemed about the same. Pretty soon there was a subway going back and forth underneath the little house. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it and she could hear it. People were moving faster and faster, and no one noticed the little house anymore. They hurried, they hurried by without a glance. So if you can see in this picture, you can barely see the house from when you can see it in the beginning, when it was on its own hill. Now it's buried by all of this city life. Pretty soon they tore down the apartment houses and tenement houses around the little house and started digging big cellars, one on each side. The steam shovels dug down 3 stories on one side and 4 stories on the other side. Pretty soon they started building up. They built up 25 stories on one side and 35 stories on the other. Can you guys imagine how tall those buildings look compared to that little house? Now the little house only saw the sun at noon and didn't see the moon or the stars at night at all, because the lights of the city were too bright. She didn't like living in the city at night. She didn't like living in the city. At night she used to dream of the country and the fields of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. The little house was very sad and lonely. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken and her shutters hung crookedly. She looked shabby, though she was just as good a house as ever underneath. Then one fine morning in spring, along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house so well. She saw the shabby little house, but she didn't hurry by. There was something about that little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "That little house looks just like the little house my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl. Only that little house was way out in the country, on a hill covered with daisies and apple trees growing around." Does anyone have any thoughts about what may be happening? Or what could happen because of the great-granddaughter saw the house?
She'll buy the house.
Oh, you think? Okay, let's see. They found it was the very same house, so they went up to the movers to see if the little house could be moved. The movers looked the little house all over and said, "Sure, this house is good as ever. This house is as good as ever. She's built so well we can move her anywhere." So they jacked up the little house and put her on wheels. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. If you guys can see in this picture, there all these people waiting around in this busy city just to get this house out of there. Where do you think that they're taking the house?
To the country.
At first, the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. They rolled along the big road and they rolled along the little roads until they were way out in the country. Nice job, Alyssa. When the little house saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel sad anymore. They went along and along, but they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried the little house here and they tried the little house there. Finally, they saw a little hill in the middle of a field and apple trees growing around. "There," said the great-granddaughter. "That's just the place." "Yes, it is," said the little house to herself. A cellar was dug on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from road to the hill. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again they painted her a lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down on her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again she could watch the sun and the moon and the stars. Once again she could watch spring and summer and fall and winter come and go. Once again, she was lived in and taken care of. Did you guys think that was going to happen in the end?
No.
Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she want to live there. The stars twinkled above her. A new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country.